Hello, everybody, and thank you for being on today's webinar. Looks like we still have some people logging in, so we're going to give it a few more minutes, and then we'll get right into it. So, a couple more minutes, we'll get started here. All right, I think it looks like everyone that was logging in is logged in, and everyone's on there. So we'll dive into it. Um, First of all, if you can't hear me, or if you have any issues with audio or anything funky like that, just type it into the questions. You should be able to ask questions through the little type box. Usually we'll have somebody back me up on this webinar and answer questions as we kind of go through this presentation. I am totally alone today, so if you have questions, chat them in. I'll try to get to them. If I don't get to them, I apologize. This system that we use is a little difficult to do both, give the presentation and kind of manage those questions coming in at the same time. So I'll try to answer them if I can. If I don't get to your questions today, email that question to techsupport@qualsys.com. That's just techsupport@qualsys.com. That's a live ticketing service we use for our tier 3 tech support. So if you have a question and I don't answer it, email your question to techsupport@qualsys.com, and one of our tier 3 guys will answer it for you. So that being said, let's get into it. So my name is Jason. Today's webinar, we're going to talk about life safety. Should be a pretty short webinar. We only have about 5 devices we're going to talk about. We're going to start the presentation out with kind of just a brief review of the panel and kind of some of the specs and the daughter cards and how many zones we support and stuff like that. We'll talk about some of the newer features that we've added to the panel. We'll talk about our new software update coming and some of the new features that are coming with that. And then we'll briefly go, and then we'll dive into life safety. And I'm going to do things a little different today. Instead of kind of running you through a PowerPoint, I'm actually going to run you through each of these devices in our dealer portal. If you're like me, sitting through a PowerPoint training is hard for me to retain anything, right? A lot of that information goes in one ear and out the other. So what I want to do today is talk about these life safety devices via our dealer portal, so that you guys could know where to go and access the information for these devices, so that if you forget everything I talk about today, you know where to go to get the information that you need down the road. So again, this will be a shorter webinar. We'll probably be 30 minutes, if that. So again, if you have questions, chat them in. I'll try to answer all of your questions. If I don't, email techsupport@colsys.com, and we'll get those questions answered there. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and dive into it. So yeah, briefly, I'm assuming on this webinar has been on a webinar before, knows who Colsys is, so I won't spend a whole lot of time here. But we are a Silicon Valley technology company. We actually, even though we're a manufacturer, we actually refer to ourselves more of a software company internally, because most of our employees are software engineers. We're very heavy on the software side, but we're based out of California. We have an office in Utah, and we were founded in 2010. And I think it's worth mentioning here that our founders don't come from the security industry, right? They come from the technology industry. And basically, when they founded the company, they were kind of, you could say, disappointed at the level of innovation, you could say, right? I mean, it's 2010 when they founded the company. In 2010, we have, iPads and computers and smartphones. I mean, technology that does cool stuff, right? But in 2010, the Simon XT was still a popular panel, right? I mean, I remember installing Simon XTs like crazy, 2009, 2010, right? So you've got this technology, guys from the industry like eBay and Lockheed Martin that are getting rubber button Simon XTs put on their wall, and they thought that they could do better, right? So they set out to build the next greatest, panel, a panel that rivals the technology that we have in our pockets, right? So in order for them to do that, we had to partner with the right people. So briefly, these are some of our key partners. First of all, Foxconn, one of the largest hardware manufacturers in the world. These guys do all the manufacturing for Apple, for Cisco, for HP. A lot of the large consumer electronics companies do their manufacturing with Foxconn. So we're lucky to have them as a partner. Quite frankly, we are not a big enough company for Foxconn to take on a company our size, right? They take on companies that do millions and millions of units every year. But because our founders come from that world, right, they had a relationship with some people over at Foxconn, and we were able to get in with them. So we're lucky to have them as a partner. Android, obviously, no introduction needed for Android, right? Everybody knows Android. The cool thing about Android is the flexibility that we have with our software and being able to add, pretty major features without redesigning a new panel, right? So I'm going to talk briefly about some of the new features today and some of the new features that and that's all really thanks to Android, right? I mean, being able to add major features to the panel via a software update, we can do that because of the Android and the ability to do over-the-air software updates, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Alarm.com, another one, no introduction needed here. Everybody knows who Alarm.com is. Cool thing about our partnership with them is we're the most fully integrated panel that they support. What that means for you guys is there is almost zero changeable programming fields on the panel that can't be done remotely through alarm.com, right? So, anything, right? If your customer calls up and they're having issues with the panel, through alarm.com, you can do pretty much the same thing you could do if you're sitting right in front of the panel. You can adjust brightness, you can adjust volume, you can reboot the panel, you can edit entry delays, exit delays, sensor programming, sensor names, chimes, I mean, you name it, right? So we think that with that level of integration, we're really avoiding, unnecessary truck rolls, service calls, right? Stuff that costs you guys money. And then last but not least, Qualcomm, right? Qualcomm is one of the largest chipset manufacturers in the world. These guys have been around forever. They invented Bluetooth. A lot of our smartphones use Qualcomm chipsets. I know a lot of the Apple phones use Qualcomm chipsets. So we essentially have a chipset phone, right? And with that comes a lot of capability. So we're excited about that. So briefly, this is, if you were to open up the back of the panel, here we call it the system on a chip. This is your cell chipset. This is a Snapdragon quad-core chipset. This is built right into the panel. This is not something you install after the fact. It's like going down to the Verizon store and buying a new phone, right? You pull it out of the box, you turn it on, and you're good to go. That's how our panel works. And with that, we're a 4G LTE panel only right now. We don't even offer 3G. We have Wi-Fi that we use for communication. We have Bluetooth, which we use, as some of you probably already know, right? Keyless entry, doing what key fob can do essentially with your smartphone. We can turn this panel to an access point using, thanks to the chipset that we have in there, and then obviously Android. And then on top of that board, you'll notice that we have these daughter cards built in, right? So let's go through these briefly. So this first card on the bottom, on our main panel, this is a S-line radio, right? So this is the radio that speaks to your security sensors. So this, our radio is an S-line radio, and S-line is an encrypted version of the 319.5 frequency, right? So with this radio, with the S-line radio, this panel will speak to all GE or Interlogic sensors, and it will speak to our encrypted S-line sensors, and S-line stands for secure line. And this radio supports up to 128 zones, so plenty of room for a big install. Now, we also recently announced new big news, right? We recently announced that you can now order a panel with a 345 radio in it, right? So if you don't want the Colsys S-line and GE frequency radio, you can order a panel with a 345 radio. So our panel will speak 2 gig in Honeywell. Or you can order a panel with a 433 radio here, right? A DSC radio. So we kind of give you guys the option of what frequency you want our panel to speak, and you guys can order those panels separately. So the cool thing is if you know that you're walking into a big 2 gig takeover, right? You could order a panel from us that speaks 2 gig already, and put it up on the wall and take over those devices without using, an expensive translator. So those are 3 different panels, 3 different SKUs. I'll show you a slide on that here in a minute. But we're excited about that, being able to offer you a panel that speaks all the frequencies, right? Pretty cool. So again, this supports 128 zones. So plenty of room for a big install, and that's the case. That's the same across the board with 345 or 433. And that's kind of a standard radio. Every panel is going to have, this radio in it. The next radio up, the red card, this is the Z-Wave Plus card. This is out of the box. This is pre-installed in every one of our panels. For those of you that don't know, Z-Wave Plus is just a newer, better version of Z-Wave, right? Z-Wave Plus devices get better battery life. They have about 20%, they claim about 20% better range than old Z-Wave. This is, of course, backwards compatible with all the old Z-Wave, so this will take over old, Z-Wave as well as the new Z-Wave. And this radio supports up to 119 zones on that radio. So again, plenty of space for a big Z-Wave install. The top slot, the orange slot, this is reserved for the Alarm.com image sensor. We don't pre-install this board. So this is a separate part, a separate SKU. This is something you'd order separately and install at the time and put in at the time of install. And the reason we don't install this is just, the image sensor. Some companies love it, some companies don't use it. So rather than charge everybody for it, we kind of give you that option, right? So just keep that in mind. If you are installing the image sensor, this is a separate piece, a separate radio that you have to order and purchase separately, right? And then the blue slot on the right, this is reserved for POWERG. And very soon this will be standard in all of our panels. Briefly, POWERG, if you don't know, is really, really cool wireless technology. This is a wireless frequency that was developed for the military in Israel. It's now owned by DSC. But basically, POWERG is a 2-way talking encrypted wireless frequency that can hop between 50 different channels. So if it catches too much interference on one channel, it just moves to the next. So it's pretty cool. So to put POWERG really in perspective, this is the cool thing about POWERG. This is the advantage of POWERG, right? So most of your legacy frequency sensors, right, whether it's S-Line, whether it's GE, whether it's 2 gig, whether it's Honeywell, most of your door sensors and motion detectors and stuff like that are tested, between 500 feet and 1,000 feet open air, right? That's pretty standard across the board for range when it comes to, door sensors and motion detectors and stuff like that, right? Our door sensors and motion detectors, most of them are tested at about 600 feet open air. Now, of course, when you get that inside, that obviously shrinks, right? But everyone tests open air. And so most of your stuff is tested, between 600 and 800 feet open air. POWERG on our panel is tested at 2,400 feet open air, right? So depending on the sensor, POWERG is getting about 4 times the range of traditional security sensors, right? So the cool thing about POWERG is if you walk into a big install, let's say it's a house with a big shed out back or a detached garage or whatever it is, right? Instead of ordering, a repeater that costs for your tech, right? Mount this box and you got to take up another outlet and you got to run another wire, right? Instead of using a repeater to repeat one of your other sensors, just use a POWERG door sensor or a POWERG motion detector or a POWERG smoke detector, right? It's going to be a lot cheaper, it's going to be a lot quicker, and you're going to get the range that you need out of it. So POWERG is really cool. We just did a 12,000 square foot mansion in California not too long ago, all POWERG, 0 issues, 0 repeaters, no problems, been working perfect ever since. We had a dealer out in Virginia that texted us all excited that they did a 100,000 square foot warehouse using POWERG, and they said that they didn't have to use any repeaters, and they were excited about that. So POWERG really opens us up to big homes and big commercial, right, without having to run wires and use repeaters and stuff like that. So pretty excited about POWERG and what we can do there with POWERG. So as mentioned, right, so we're a dual SRF panel. We're a dual security RF panel, right? So when you order a panel that speaks a different frequency, you're going to get POWERG with it every time, right? So our panel will speak POWERG and one of the legacy frequencies simultaneously, right? So you can have POWERG and 319.5 working simultaneously. You can have POWERG and 345 working simultaneously, or you can have POWERG and 433 working simultaneously, right? So you can kind of pick and choose, right? POWERG sensors might be a little bit more money than your legacy frequency sensors, but they're going to be a lot cheaper than running wires or using a repeater. So standardize on a 319.5 panel and use POWERG when you need, a little extra range, right? So we're hopefully ditching the need for translators and repeaters and stuff like that, and just using POWERG. So as mentioned, this is an old slide, so ignore the coming soon. These are all available now, but these are the 3 different panels, the 3 different levels of SKUs that you guys can order, right? So this first panel on the left, this is your POWERG with S-line, right? So this is your S-line, your Colsys, and your Interlogix radio. The middle panel is your POWERG and 2 gig and Honeywell, your 345 panel. And then the far right one is your POWERG and 433 panel. And you can see there's different SKUs at the bottom here for each panel and for each carrier, right? So you got a different SKU for Verizon and AT&T and TELUS for each one of these different panels, right? So keep that in mind when you're ordering these panels up. Now, briefly, just some of our newer features that I want to run through because they're new and they're exciting, and we like to remind people of this. We with our newest software, we now support the ability to live view your doorbell camera on the panel. This is exciting. This is something that we've been, people have been asking for a long time. So any of the Skybell door cams will work on this. Obviously, it's just a matter of checking some boxes and enabling this feature on alarm.com. Basically, someone rings your doorbell camera, you'll get a message that pops up on your panel letting you know that the doorbell was rang. You can choose to answer or dismiss. If you answer, it will go full screen live view mode of your doorbell camera. You can talk to the doorbell camera from here. If your system is armed, you can disarm the system from here. If you have a door lock, you can unlock the lock from here, letting that person in without ever leaving your panel. And then you can obviously hang up the call from here as well. So pretty cool. And then we also support live view for a handful of other alarm.com cameras. So there's 6 or 7 alarm.com cameras that we support with this. The other cool thing too is if those alarm.com cameras have audio, we support that 2-way audio through the panel as well. So we don't have the icons up on this, but if this was a 2-way audio speaking camera, there would be an icon on the panel that would allow you to push to talk. So in this example, right, your kids are upstairs playing. From your panel downstairs, you could push to talk and say, kids, come on down, it's time for dinner. And they would obviously hear that through the camera and come running down. So pretty cool. And then we also added this new install wizard. So this is exciting. So on the panel from the advanced settings menu, you can access this install wizard. And basically this wizard takes you guys through every step of the panel, right? It takes you through connecting to Wi-Fi and connecting your cell unit, getting it talking to alarm.com, updating the panel, installing your Z-Wave, adding user codes, installing the panel glass break detector, everything, right? It's a step-by-step install wizard that takes your text from step one to, all the way through the full install. So we're excited about this. If you haven't seen this, check this out. Really awesome tool for, newer installers, guys that maybe don't know Colsys very well or totally new to installing and, in general, right? Just period. Have them run through this wizard. It will take them through all the important steps on, with installing this panel. And then, we always like to mention that we have some really, really cool testing tools. If you guys are actually really truly using these tools on every install, you should never have to go back for a service call, right? This is the first of the tools. This is an advanced sensor test. This is going to check the signal strength for your individual sensors, and it's going to show you their dBm levels. And if you're not familiar with dBm is a very granular, high-level look at signal strength for sensors. So as you can see in this example, right, we log kind of a noise floor, right? So this red line on this graph is telling you that level of dBm, the panel can no longer hear your sensors. The yellow line is kind of the threshold. We want to make sure our sensors are talking above that line. And basically, the further above that yellow line the sensors are talking, the stronger they're communicating, right? So every time that sensor talks, every time you open a door sensor, it's going to log a dBm point on this graph. And you can kind of see how strongly that sensor is communicating, right? The cool thing about this test is it's extremely sensitive. So, I mean, you can move a sensor from a wood door to a metal door and watch these dBm levels, get worse, right? Just really cool the granularity, that you get with this test. And like I said, if your techs are checking this before they leave the house, they should never go back for a sensor, losing supervision, because this will tell you if it's talking strong enough or not. This will tell you if you need to add a repeater or not, right? We also have a bunch of cool Z-Wave tests. The most popular one is this Z-Wave map. This will actually visually map and display for you your Z-Wave mesh network and show you what it looks like. It will show your signal strength for every device. It will let you know if a device is not communicating. It'll even tell you if a device is being used as a repeater or not, which is pretty cool. So definitely, if you're not already familiar with these tools, get familiar with them as you install our panel and you start doing big installs with Colsys. These are really super valuable tools to use that will help you avoid service calls, right? So as mentioned, right, we have, let's get into it. So we have 3 different panels, 3 different new panels. The IQ Panel 2 Plus, right, that gives you that dual SRF, and their SKUs. So briefly, this is a list, and this isn't even an exhaustive list of POWERG devices, but POWERG makes pretty much everything everybody else does. Door sensors, motion detectors, smoke detectors, key fobs, you name it, flood detectors, sirens. They make everything everybody else does. The difference is that you're getting crazy good long range compared to everything else that we're used to installing, right? So if you ever need a motion detector or a glass break detector or whatever, POWERG makes a version of that will get you the range that you need. And then this is a list of, and again, not even a complete list, but a list of everything that that Colsys makes, right? So again, the advantage of the Colsys sensors is they're encrypted. A lot of your legacy frequency stuff is not. I think the industry is forcing encryption. I think everybody's encryption manufacturers might have encryption, but surprisingly, a lot of them don't today that I know of, unless there's some new stuff that I'm not aware of. But a lot of your 2 gigs and your GEs and stuff like that aren't doing encryption yet, which is kind of scary. So the S-Line gets you that encryption, helps you prevent, replay attacks and stuff like that. But we make everything everybody else does, right? So shock sensors and medical pendants and flood sensors and temperature sensors and takeover modules, we make a version of that as well. So you can see between POWERG and S-Line, we got you covered. I mean, pretty much anything you need, we have it for you. And the difference is we have it in, obviously, encrypted, because both POWERG and S-Line are encrypted, but we also have it in super long range, right? POWERG. So let's dive into it. So from here, rather than take you through a PowerPoint, I want to take you through our dealer portal, and we'll talk about these devices from here. So The reason, again, is I just think it's valuable for you guys to know where to find information, so you're not stuck at calling tech support or not knowing, right? You guys can know where to get the information I'm going to talk about today. So if you don't already have access, I would recommend getting access. This website is right here, dealers.qualsys.com. So if you don't already have access, go to this website, register, and get access. And this gives you access to a ton of stuff: sales training, technical training, downloads. So we have all sorts of videos and spec sheets and training manuals and all sorts of crazy stuff for download. I mean, if I click on residential downloads, you got product flyers, you got door hangers, you've got pamphlets and graphics, and you've got all sorts of crazy stuff on here, right? We have the same thing for our builder stuff. We have stuff for technical software downloads. Under the support tab, we post all of our technical service bulletins. So every time we release a new software update, we'll release a TSB for that. You can find, you got everything. Marketing store. So if you want to come on here and order marketing materials with Colsys on them, this is where you come. So to talk about the life safety that we're going to talk about today, I'm going to go into downloads, and I'm going to go to technical downloads. This is where, the operations side, the technicians are going to spend most of their time. So briefly, you've got full installation manuals on here, user guides, you've got compatibility lists. So this is big. I'm going to talk about this. So if you're curious what Z-Wave devices we have tested and kind of officially certified, we have a list for that. If you're curious what RF devices work with our panel, both 2 gig and DSC and Honeywell, we have a list for that, right? Moving down, if you want to see training videos on the Colsys panel, we've got them, right? They're under here. Panel help videos, if you want to see the videos that we have loaded directly on the panel, they're here. Device training, you've got it. And then if we keep scrolling down, this is where we get to all of our spec sheets. So this is where I want to talk about these life safety devices with you guys and go through these spec sheets together briefly. So the first device that we said we were going to talk about today is the flood sensor. So if I come down here to flood, I can click on that device and I get some information about the device. We have a video on the flood sensor, and I can go over some of the features and specifications, right? So this is an encrypted sensor. It comes with a 6-foot cord. So that lead is already connected to the sensor. You don't have to worry about it, and it's 6 feet. Gives you some instructions on where and how to install it. You've got your specifications, how big it is. So this sensor's tested at 600 feet open air. You've got your supervisory keep alive. So this lets you know that that sensor checks in every 70 minutes. Your operating temperatures, you've got your battery. It's a 3-volt lithium ion, 2 of them. You've got and it's right here, the Panasonic CR2032 battery, right? If you're using Panasonic, Energizer, just some recommended batteries for that, right? Those are your specs. But if I come down here under downloads and click on IQ Flood S Quick Guide, I get this little quick guide, right? And this gives you everything you need to know. So some recommendations on where to install that sensor. You've got your specs here as well. And then you've and then some instructions, right? So step 2, pull out the battery tabs, put your tape on it, right? Or if there are screw holes if you want to mount it. And then here's your step 5 on how to learn it in. Put your panel in auto learn mode, open, close the sensor to tamper the device. And then this is what you program it as, right? Select water as a sensor type, and then select sensor subtype 1 as a subtype, and you're good to go. And that's it. And that's all you do. You program it, you name it, laundry room flood sensor, and you hit add. Do you want voice commands on? Do you want chimes on? And that's it. It's that simple. Now, something that's not on here when it comes to testing this device, if your technician's going to throw this in on an install today, and they want to test it and they want to send a signal from it, what you want to do is, so this little sensor, let me see if there's a better picture of it here. Well, yeah, right here. So this picture right here gives you a good idea of what that little probe looks like. It just sits on the floor, and you've got those 2 metal contacts are there. Those are the contacts, right, that obviously, detect the water and trip the sensor. So for your technicians that are testing this, they can do it a number of different ways, right? I mean, obviously they could stick this probe in a bowl of water Most guys will just use their little mini screwdriver and short those two contacts. So if you just put your screwdriver in between those two contacts, that can cause that sensor to trip. I've seen guys stick this on their tongue and trip it that way, right? Not really recommended to lick your sensor until it goes off, but you know, I've seen it done, right? Point is, we want to short these two contacts to get that sensor to trip. Now, this contact does take 12. I think it's 12 seconds for it to trip. So, you know, we get this call all the time. A technician will install the flood sensor and he'll put it in a bowl of water, or he'll use a screwdriver to short those two contacts, and then he shorts them, or he gets it wet, and then he you know, it doesn't ever trip. But there is kind of a threshold. It's got to be shorted for 12 seconds before that sensor will trip. So if you're using your screwdriver, connect those two contacts with your screwdriver for 12 seconds. That signal will go. Or put it in a bowl of water for 12 seconds and get that sensor to go, right? But there is that threshold of 12 seconds before that sensor will trip, okay? So I did get a question here. Can the Colsys 2 be upgraded to this capability? I'm assuming this question is referring, sorry that this is delayed, to the ability to speak different frequencies. Correct me if I'm wrong. And to speak POWERG and all that stuff. The answer to that question is no. If you want a Colsys panel that speaks DSC or Honeywell or even POWERG for that matter, you have to order you know, one of the new IQ Panel 2 Pluses. We don't stock or ship those daughter cards separately for install after the fact, okay? So sorry, that was probably a little late, but keep texting those questions in if you have them. So that is your flood sensor. Pretty straightforward device. If those contacts get shorted for more than 12 seconds, we'll send a signal to the panel and let you know, okay? So pretty straightforward. Moving on. So if we go back to our technical downloads under the dealer portal, the next device that we can talk about is the carbon monoxide detector. So I can scroll down here to the IQ Carbon. I can click on that sensor and it will pull up some information for me. So I get a description of the sensor. I've got a video here that you can watch. We've got features and specifications. So let's go through this real quick. So obviously our life safety, our smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors are on 24/7. Doesn't matter if your sensors or if your panel is armed or disarmed. You've got a test button on there. You know, it's going to work like every other carbon monoxide detector you work for. In fact, you know, this looks identical to the carbon monoxide detector that I know some other manufacturers use, right? Like 2 gig. So if you're familiar with that device, it's going to be pretty much the same carbon monoxide detectors you're used to using. So we have one 3-volt CR123A battery in there. You've got your alarm on this panel built into the sounder in this device is 85 dBA. You've got your operating temperature. You know, you've got your humidity ranges. I mean, stuff on here you probably will never use, right? But we have it all on here. So if I come down here and click on the quick installation guide, you get some information here, right? General information. Obviously, you know, we recommend you keep it, you test and maintain, you know, your device, change your batteries out. Let's see here, what did I want to show you? This thing. So both our smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors have these, you know, guides or these spec sheets or I guess these manuals in the box with the sensor, right? And as technicians, if something goes wrong with your carbon monoxide detector or your smoke detector, right, it's faulty and we just want to swap it. But a lot of times, you know, if that thing is chirping or beeping, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's got a low battery or that it's not working, right? It could mean something else. So you've got your detector end of life, right? This will flash yellow every 23 seconds. That lets you know that it's time for you to replace that sensor. You know, if it is a true low battery, it will flash yellow every 12 seconds, right? If there's a trouble, you know, something else is up with that device, if it's an alarm, if it's tampered, you know, you've got all these different, you know, LED indicators on the actual sensor. And most technicians don't realize that that sensor via LED is trying to tell you something, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about it with the smoke detector because there's a little bit more information there. But I would recommend, if you're going back to service, these devices ever, pull this out of the box and read this, because this can be helpful, right? This can help you avoid maybe unnecessarily replacing a device. What else did I want to show you on here? You got it's a pretty straightforward device. Let's see, right here. So this is our recommendation for mounting the device. If it's ceiling mounted, we want to position it at least 12 inches from any wall. And if it's wall mounted, you want to position it at least 6 inches from the ceiling, right? You want to avoid that little kind of corner between the wall and the ceiling. And then we recommend, at least light, light switch height or higher is our recommendation. So our recommendation isn't to put this sensor low. We want it to be put a little bit higher, at least light switch height or higher. And there's that, right? Pretty straightforward. So to learn the sensor into our panel, it's pretty straightforward. There's two things you can do. You can tamper the device, or you can hold the test button on the sensor for a couple seconds, and that will learn that sensor into the panel. Now, make sure that when you learn this in, you're getting the correct DL code. The DL code is the sensor ID. 2GIG calls it the TX ID. Just make sure that you're getting that correct code into the panel. And here's the best part. The panel knows that you're learning in a carbon monoxide detector, right? So when you trip the sensor, it will pre-populate all the programming for your carbon monoxide detector. The only thing you have to do is choose a name for it, right? Is it an upstairs carbon monoxide detector? Is it a utility room carbon monoxide detector? And that's pretty much it. It's really that simple. So that is our carbon monoxide detector in a nutshell. Again, if you have further questions, text them in, email techsupport@qualcys.com, or come to this dealer portal and look this information up for yourself. So we got a couple more questions here I want to answer real quick. What will a software update? So this question is, what will a software update on a QUALCYS 2 do for it? So if you have an older QUALCYS panel and you are updating the software, you're going to get all the new features, right? So briefly, we'll take a pause from life safety and talk about software again real quick. So briefly, even if you have an old panel that doesn't support the new frequencies, right, the 2GIG and the Honeywell and the DSC or the POWERG, you can still update that panel and get the latest features, right? So a software update on a QUALCYS panel that you've had installed for a year is still going to get the latest stuff. It's still going to get the live view. It's still going to get the live answer. It's still going to get the install wizard. It's going to get all that stuff, okay? Now, I forgot to mention, I did want to mention that we are working on a new software. 2.3.0 is the new software. That's going to be available sometime December. And we have a bunch of stuff coming with that, but a couple of the main features are with this new software update, we will now support partitions. We're going to have 4 partitions available in that software update. So, if you have an old panel or a new panel, right, update your panel to that new software, you're going to get partitions, right? Another feature, we're making some tweaks to some software for some new sensors that are coming down the road. We're making some tweaks to the install wizard and allowing you guys to customize some of that stuff. A bunch of little features, right? We're going to allow you guys to take a peek in with the panel camera from alarm.com. I'm trying to think of some of the other. I mean, there's a bunch of features that is coming with 2.3, so keep an eye out for that. 2.3 again is coming this December. So if you have an older panel, keep updating that panel because you're going to keep getting new features. So hopefully that answered your question. Is our panel listed for household fire? So our panel is listed for household fire. So you can put this panel in and put in smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors and stuff like that. Let's see here. Somebody said that our tech support recommended not doing life safety on our panel a few weeks ago. Not sure who you spoke to about that, but definitely not the case. We recommend life safety. Obviously, we sell it. We actually now also, if you ever use our hardwire takeover modules, we now support fully UL legally certified support taking over 2-wire smokes. So if you're doing a hardwire takeover and you're using our translator, you can now, technically legally take over those 2-wire smoke detectors, which is pretty cool. Let's see here. So without getting too distracted with questions, let's move on here. So the next device I wanted to talk about was the Colsys smoke detector. So let's talk about that real quick. So if I come back to my dealer portal and click on the IQ Smoke, you got a description here, you got a video, and then you got some features and specifications. So 3 to 5 year battery life. I don't know if we had it listed, but that's the same for the carbon monoxide detector. You've got your battery type in here. You've got your sensitivity, right? So 1.5 to 3.5% per foot. Your heat rating is fixed at 135. So this is a smoke detector and a heat detector in two, right? 2 in 1. The heat portion of that sensor is just fixed at 135 degrees. So if the temperature in the environment gets above 135 degrees, we'll send an alarm. You got your operating temperature, your dimensions, your UL listing stuff. And then if I click on the installation manual, I get some more information. So this graph, again, kind of going back to what we talked about with the carbon monoxide detector, is helpful when it comes to diagnosing a smoke detector, right? Because listen to this. So look at this. So if there's a detector trouble, let's use this example, right? Let's say the smoke detector is dirty, right? Believe it or not, these detectors can get dirty, right? In a home. So listen to this. So when a detector has been contaminated or it's dirty, it will blink yellow LEDs once every 8 seconds, and there's a chirp every 48 seconds, right? And then after 12 hours of this, that sensor is going to report a loss of supervision, right? So guess what? So this is what happens, right? Probably 99% of the time, someone calls up, says my smoke detector is chirping, and my panel is showing it as a loss of supervision, right? Guess what a tech's going to do? He's going to go out there and he's going to assume that either the battery's dead or it's not reading that battery because it's chirping, and he's going to want to replace it. Or because the panel is showing that sensor as a loss of supervision, he's going to assume that it's out of range and that it sucks and doesn't have good range, and he's going to try to replace it, or he's going to want to add a repeater, right? That's not the thing. That's not what you should do. Just replace the device blindly, right? Because that sensor might be trying to tell you something different, right? So you can come in here, pull out this guide out of the box, and it will tell you what is going on with the sensor, what those LEDs mean, so that you don't have to just blindly replace a sensor for no reason or try to add a sensor for no reason, right? Because it could mean that it's dirty, it could mean that it's got a low battery, it could mean that there's a trouble, any of those things, right? So you'll want to use this guide for reference when troubleshooting smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, okay? So same thing like a smoke detector. So this is a smoke/heat. You've got a test button on there. You can learn this in by either tampering it or holding that test button down for a few seconds. Just like the carbon monoxide detector, the panel is going to know that you're learning in a smoke detector. So as long as you verify that DL code came in correctly, all you have to do is change the name. Learn it in, change the name. Is it an upstairs smoke detector? Is it a downstairs smoke detector? Name it and turn off your voice chimes, and you know what I mean. There's very little programming because the panel already knows and kind of presets all of your types and your groups and stuff like that, right? So pretty straightforward. Now we do get this question a lot because this looks identical to the smoke detector that 2GIG uses. The difference is that the 2GIG smoke detector also supports the freeze function. I just want to mention that this smoke detector does not support the freeze function, okay? This is a smoke and heat only. It is not a smoke, heat, and freeze. So just keep that in mind. We get that question a lot because it looks the same as the other one, and they always call us asking us how to enable the freeze portion. Now, as far as installing these go, we don't necessarily, have specific recommendations. I guess our specific recommendation is to follow the NFPA 72 National Fire Alarm Code when it comes to installing these. This has some guides, right? You got to have one on every floor. I think they recommend one in every living area. and then one outside of those living areas, right? So there's some direction on how to install these when you're putting them in. But again, this is a valuable spec sheet or manual that can be found in the box with the detector or our dealer portal. Okay. Now, briefly, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on POWERG sensors just because they're not our sensors, right? They're DSC sensors. And so we don't have all this documentation for those sensors. But a couple things that I want to mention. So yes, POWERG makes a flood sensor. Yes, POWERG makes a carbon monoxide detector. So if you need one of those sensors with a little bit better range, you can use those with our panel without worrying about any, translators or anything like that. But I do want to mention the cool thing about the POWERG smoke detector is they support wireless interconnect, which is really cool, meaning that if you have 5 POWERG smoke detectors and one smoke detector goes off, all of those smoke detectors go off, right? Which is pretty cool. So wireless interconnect is what they call it. So if you want an interconnected smoke system and you don't want to hardwire it, or you don't want to use those cheap little, firefighters or whatever they call them, use POWERG. Put a POWERG smoke detector in. When one goes off, they all go off, which is pretty cool. And those sensors actually check in every 200 seconds, which is interesting compared to our every 70 minutes. So that's kind of a fun fact about the POWERG smoke detectors. People really like that feature, the wireless interconnect. So keep that in mind when you're deciding what sensors to put in. Okay. So I just got this question: does the panel or smoke detector allow for one siren goes off, smoke detectors, then they all go off? So that's that wireless interconnect, right? If you're using a Colsys smoke detector, if one smoke detector goes off, they don't all go off, right? Obviously the panel will go off with that smoke detector, but there's no wireless interconnect. If you're using POWERG, and you just wrote back in, there's the answer. So, yep, if you want that wireless interconnect, go POWERG for sure. Okay. Now, the other sensor I wanted to talk about, let's back out of this smoke detector and let's click on the temperature sensor real quick. So this is our temperature sensor. Again, you've got your description, you've got your features. Pretty straightforward, right? Pretty easy device, small little device, easy to install. This is just a fixed device, right? So the freeze portion of this sensor is fixed at 40 degrees. The high temp portion of the sensor is fixed at 100 degrees, right? So if the temps drops below 40, you'll get a notification. If it goes above 100 degrees, you'll get a notification, right? So not a bad sensor to stick in a snowbird home, right? If you've got a vacation home or a cabin or whatever, if you're traveling a lot, this is a good sensor to have down in your house so that you'll know, right? If the heater fails, send me a notification, right? If the AC fails, send me a notification so that I don't return to my cabin or my vacation property 6 months later and it's, the pipes are all frozen and broken and whatnot, right? So let's click on this quick guide here and get some more information on this. So, so this is important. Your low temp again is fixed at 40 degrees and it doesn't restore or reset until 45. So if the temperature reaches 40 degrees and it goes off, it's not going to restore until 45. So that's important with testing, right? Some guys will go, when they're testing the sensor, they'll go stick it in the freezer, and it will hit that 40 degree mark, and it will send a signal to the panel, and then they sit there and try to restore it, and it doesn't restore for a few minutes, and that's because it's not going to restore until it gets up 5 degrees, right? So same thing with the high temp. Our signal sends at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, it won't restore until the temperature reaches back down to 95 degrees, okay? So we'll talk about this here in a second, but there's a unique DL code for each function of this sensor, so I'll talk about that here in a minute. This sensor just check the temperature every 5 minutes, so that's cool, that's good to know. And then the battery checked every hour. So these are the battery recommendations, the 2032 CR batteries, if you're using any of these type of batteries. But here's the kind of the install portion of it, right? So pull the battery tabs, put your tape on, or use your screws, right? Put your panel in learn mode, and then this is where it's a little bit different, right? So there's 2 ways to learn a sensor into our panel, right? You have your auto learn mode, and then you have your add sensor mode, right? Auto learn mode is I go and I trip that sensor, and it automatically picks it up, right? Add sensor mode is going to require that you manually type in that DL code for that sensor to be learned into your panel, right? Now, the reason we want to learn this temperature sensor in the manual way is because there's two different IDs. There's two different DL codes for the sensor, right? There's a separate code. There's a separate ID for the freeze portion, and there's a separate ID for the heat portion, right? So it's technically two sensors in one. So you want to learn it in manually so that you make sure you learn each of those in correctly, right? So on the sensor and on the box that the sensor comes in, it lists two different DL codes, right? The low temperature sensor portion has an L in front of it and then a DL code, right? The high temperature sensor portion of it has an H in front of it for high, right? And then a DL code. So I put my sensor into learn mode, which is the manual learn mode. And for the freeze portion, I'll use the low DL code. Type that in, program it, right? And then I'll hit add sensor again, and I'll type in the high sensor DL code, right? And that's two different codes for each function of that sensor. And then this is a little confusing, but again, this is why we have these quick guides. Both sensors are going to be learned in as a freeze type, okay? So this is what you'd see on your panel. Even though you have a high, even though you're using the high DL code, right? Even though that sensor is being programmed in as a high temperature sensor, you're going to use the freeze sensor type, okay? And then the group, you're going to, for the same thing for the group, right? Both sensors are going to be learned in as a group 52, okay? Because this is a funky sensor, this stuff doesn't necessarily auto program for you, right? So you just want to make sure both DL codes are learned in as a freeze type and as a sensor group 52, okay? And then all you have to do is name it, hit add, and you're good to go. So that simple. So pretty straightforward. So I got a question. Just to be clear, I can use POWERG smoke detectors and QUALCOMM sensors for the rest. 100%. Yep, that's the beauty of having that dual SRF, right? So if you want that wireless interconnect, right, where one smoke detector goes off and they all go off, yeah, totally. Use QUALCOMM sensors for all the security, all your doors, motions, and flood and temperature sensors, and then use POWERG for the smoke detectors. You can totally use them simultaneously together. That's the beauty of having that dual SRF. So great question. I got another question here. How many 2-wire smokes can you hardwire converter use? So I mentioned that our hardwire translator is now fully certified and listed to take over 2-wire smoke detectors. That will support up to 10 smoke detectors wired together. Now, we have only tested and certified the two, what are they called? System sensor smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. So that's what we recommend if you are using new smoke and carbon monoxide detectors that are hardwired. So that's our recommendation for new. That doesn't mean that any of the other brands won't work. That just means that that's the only brand that we've really tested and officially certified. But yeah, totally. I mean, we got this hardwire translator. We went and ordered 10 hardwire smoke detectors, wired them up in our office, and it works beautifully. So, yep, good question. How many 2-wire smokes can be hardwired into our translator? The answer is up to 10. The only thing to keep in mind with that is you want to make sure that you're using our hardwire 16F. And that's not on shelves yet. It's done. We just got done with all the UL listing stuff. The only thing that we're waiting on right now is getting them out to distributors. So you may not be able to go buy a hardwire 16F today, but within the next month you'll start seeing those show up on shelves. Okay. So going back to our temp sensor, so again, a little funky with how this has two different DL codes and now they learn in. But now that you know where to get the install guide for this sensor, right, you shouldn't have any problems with this if you decide to go and install one of these. Okay. So real quick, so POWERG makes a temp sensor, and today so this is really important. Today the temp sensor works just like this temp sensor, right? It's fixed at 40 degrees and fixed at 100 degrees. The difference obviously is that it gets crazy good long range, right? However, coming very soon, you will be able to get you will be able to program those thresholds, right? So I'm not 100% sure if this is coming 2.3 or later software, but very soon you'll be able to use a POWERG temperature sensor and choose those thresholds. So let's say I want, instead of the freeze to go off at 40 degrees, I want it to go off at 55 degrees, right? That will be something that you will be able to program into a panel. Let's say that instead of going off at 100 degrees, I want it to go off at 75 degrees. You will be able to program that POWERG temperature sensor to do that. And then on top of that, they have a probe that goes along with their temperature sensor, right? So the cool thing that you'll be able to do with this is use it for, fridges and freezers and stuff like that for businesses, right? You'll be able to put a POWERG temperature sensor in a freezer, put the probe and install the probe into that freezer, and then say, okay, I want to make sure that if this fridge goes above 40 degrees or whatever, right, 45 degrees, send me notification. I got to know if this fridge fluctuates at all because I got a lot of money in food in there or whatever, right? You will be able to do that with a POWERG temp sensor coming soon on our panel. So again, keep in mind, today the POWERG temp sensor works just like ours. It's fixed at 40 and fixed at 100. But coming soon with a software update, you'll be able to program those thresholds. So again, I'm not super clear if that's coming with 2.3 or later software. But reach out to us, when 2.3 comes out, and we'll be able to verify if that was in that software build or not. So pretty cool that you'll be able to have that flexibility with the POWERG smoke detector. Let's see here. Last but not least, our medical pendant. Let's talk about this. So I'm going to go back to my technical downloads page, and I'm going to click on our medical pendant. I've got a description, I've got some features and specifications. So let's breeze through this real quick. This is pretty straightforward, and then I'll talk about some of the new ones that we have that we're working on. So pretty straightforward, works like every other medical pendant. Press and hold the button for 2 seconds, it'll send a signal. You've got a heartbeat LED that blinks every minute to let you know that it's still connected. Got about 100-foot range on it. The battery is fully sealed, so it is waterproof. Not submersible, but tested. Just keep this in mind, right? We don't recommend that you submerge it, but it was tested at a 1 meter depth. Can be worn as a lanyard or a watch. Works like every other medical pendant. Now, a couple things here. Let's see here. Supervisory signals are sent every hour. This is important. With this specific medical pendant, because it's waterproof, this battery is sealed. And because it's sealed, it's not replaceable, right? So you can't pop this thing open and replace a battery, right? You have to replace the whole watch. Okay, so keep that in mind with this device. Your temperature range is 0 to 120, should be plenty, right? Pretty straightforward. Now I can come down here and click on the quick guide and get some more information on this, right? Like how to learn it in. Put your panel in learn mode, press and hold the button for 2 seconds. For a couple seconds, and it will learn into the panel. And again, the best part about the Colsys panel is it will know that you're learning in this device. It'll pre-program everything for it. The only thing you have to do is name it, hit save, and move on with your install, right? Pretty cool. Now, this is the medical pendant we have today currently. We are working on a couple different versions. We have another version that just for one looks much better. It's much more attractive looking. That we're kind of testing right now and trying to decide if we want to go with. But otherwise, it's the same thing. Press and hold. It can be worn as a watch or as a necklace, right? But the other one that we're working on is a fall pendant. So it's a medical pendant / fall pendant, which is actually really cool. So if someone, grandma, trips and falls in her house, we'll pick that up and send the signal to the panel, which is pretty cool. So not sure where we're at with that. Actually, that might be available today. I don't think we have it listed on our website yet, but it may be available if you're interested in that fall sensor. Email techsupport@qualcys.com, and we can kind of follow up on where we're at with that. And if we have them available, we can get some out to you. So let us know if you're interested in that. And then I did get a question on here. Someone is asking about bed sensors and pill sensors. And fall sensors. So what he's referring to is more of a wellness install, right? So people are using security now to track the elderly, right? So when grandma gets out of bed, send me notification, right? When she if she doesn't go and access, open up her pill box, send me a notification, right? If she falls, send me a notification, right? So we don't make any bed sensors or pill sensors or anything like that. I think there are sensors out there on the 319.5 frequency that would work with our panel. So you just want to kind of research and find. I mean, basically, our panel will speak any of the legacy frequencies. So if you're interested in bed sensors and pill sensors, find one that speaks DSC, Honeywell, 2 gig, or GE, and it will work with our panel, right? But he did ask specifically about the fall sensor. Know that we are working on one. If it's not available today, it will be very, very soon. Okay. So that's it. So that's kind of an overview of the life safety devices. Remember, we really only talked about the Colsys ones. POWERG makes a version of their own for every one of these, and in some cases they're better, right? Like their smoke detectors support the wireless interconnect, right? Their temperature sensor very soon will allow you to manually adjust those thresholds, right? Which is really cool. So keep that in mind as you're installing this stuff. If you don't like the one that we have, look into the POWERG one. At the very least, you're going to get better range, and sometimes they support a few more features, right, on some of their stuff. So POWERG is really cool. So we covered the flood sensor, we covered the carbon, the smoke, the temperature sensor, and the medical pendant. That's all we really had planned to talk about, since we don't really support, or we don't really make any of our own, bed sensors and pill sensors and stuff like that. But the beauty is we speak all the frequencies. So if there's something out there that we don't have that you guys want to use, order it in a 2 gig or a Honeywell or a DSC frequency and buy a panel from us that speaks that frequency. That's the beauty of that. So thanks for jumping on. Hopefully we didn't bore you to death. Hopefully if you don't have access to this dealer portal, you'll get it, as there's some valuable information on here. Let me show you one more thing real quick before we let you go. If I come back to my technical downloads, and where is it at? If I scroll, maybe I passed it, up here at the very top, right? Compatibility list, right? So here, if I click on this list, this is going to list everything that our panel has been tested with, right? So this very first couple pages, these are all the POWERG sensors that our panel supports, right? So if you're curious about adding POWERG sensors and you need to know the part numbers, this is where you can find that list, right? If you're like, hey man, I want to do a Colsys install, but I want to use POWERG smoke detectors because they support that wireless interconnect, I can pull this list up and I can scroll down until I find smoke detector, right? And there's a part number, PG9926. That's the part number that you would want to use if you're using POWERG smoke detectors, or if you want a POWERG smoke and heat detector, PG9916 is the part number for that, right? And then if there's any limitations on that device, we'll let you know on the right. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to start using POWERG, this is going to be valuable because this will list all the part numbers that we have integrated with, right? Or vice versa. So if we scroll down and you want to know what Interlogic sensors have been tested with our panel and what their part numbers are, here you go, right? If you want to know what resolution products have been tested with our panel and what their part numbers are, you got it. Honeywell, 2 gig, DSC, right? These are all sensors that we have tested and know work. That doesn't mean if they're not on the list they won't work. It just means that these are devices that we've had in our office that we've tested and kind of greenlit, right? Same thing goes for Z-Wave over here. So as you start to do panels and you start to kind of mix and match different sensors and stuff like that, these lists are going to be valuable. Again, this is found under the technical download section of our dealer portal. So I'd say the only thing, last but not least, if you don't already have this information, you might want to write it down. We do have a tech support available from 8 to 8. That's a tier 1 and tier 2. If those guys can't get you what you need, they can transfer you to tier 3. Or if you just want to bypass them and go straight to the tier 3 guys, email techsupport@qualsys.com. Again, that's a live ticketing service. We have somebody monitor that all day, every day. And that's a straight shot to the tier 3 guys. That's a straight shot to the technical account management team. And you can kind of bypass the tier 1 and tier 2 guys. So again, if I didn't get to your questions, I apologize. I will stick on here for a couple more minutes and answer a couple of the questions I haven't been able to get to yet. If I don't answer your question, email techsupport@qualsys.com and we'll get those questions answered. So again, thanks everybody for jumping on, and reach out if you have any further questions. Thanks.